Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Podcana episode 22. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by Kawa. And we have some interesting news this week. We actually have our first Lorcana Errata. Kawa, are you familiar with the word Errata? I know you come mostly from a digital card game background. Have you heard of what an Errata is?
I have not. I love this, man. Every week I learn new words from you. It's great.
Yeah, so errata is it's not that drastic in Lorcana, but it's probably one of the worst things that can happen in a card game in terms of like fixing cards. Basically, what it means is that they alter the text on the back end in the official rules, the Oracle text, whatever you want to call it, to say something different than it says on the card. And this is kind of bad because, when new players engage with the game, basically what the card says is not what it does. And yeah, it can lead to some tension for sure. So it's usually used as a very last resort kind of thing.
Sure.
Games will usually balance around these cards or ban them outright rather than errata them. But in Lorcana's case, the errata is actually pretty small, and actually it probably doesn't change how you were playing the card anyway. It refers to Hey here, and basically Hey said the support keyword said whenever this character requests, you may add their attack to another chosen character's attack this turn. And now it has been updated to the updated text is to another chosen character. The original print was a chosen character. So in the original print, I guess you could theoretically target itself. And now, it does specify that it's another character. If it's questing, the original thought is like, why would you target itself? Because it's already tapped. But I guess that could be relevant.
Sure.
And so they also say at the time of this post, it's unclear whether the other errata cards, such as Befuddle or Work Together, will be also fixed in this restock. So I'm not sure they have. So with this errata, they've printed a new version of Hey rather than just only updated this rules sort of in their database, whatever you want to call it. But we'll see if that goes out for Befuddle and Work Together as well. But all very small erratas. I've played a few games that erratas have happened. And in Flesh and Blood, there was one that was pretty significant that like drastically changed what one of the heroes did. But it was all good. So yeah, nothing too crazy on that end. Other than that, tons of Rise of the Floodborn reveals as usual. I mean, I just want to say, Ravensburger, I don't know if you, Kawa, were paying a lot of attention sort of prior to release, but they had one of the worst card release, like preview and spoiler seasons that I've ever seen. It was very lackluster, but hands up. Don't come at me quite yet. I will say that this Rise of the Floodborn spoiler season has probably been the best one I've ever seen. Like it is very well distributed. It's been slowly dripped out. I'm consistently excited. So I just want to give them kudos for that because it's been very engaging.
They've also actually been giving card reveals to a lot of Lorcana sites and even small kind of content creators, which I think is absolutely amazing to see. I know, for example, tonight there's tonight for me, whatever time zone you guys are in. Today, it's probably going to be out by the time you guys see the pod or listen to the pod, but there's more like card reveals coming in a little bit today, and I think there's supposed to be like 4 cards revealed for that, so that's like super exciting, right? And of course, like we're getting to the stage where it's like we're basically like 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks out from Rise of Floodborn, and there's still a lot of cards we haven't seen. So this is where it gets really exciting. So we get to see a lot of cards in a short space of time, right?
Yeah, definitely. I really like it when the cards are actually dripped slowly over a few weeks, like we've seen so far. And yeah, I just want to iterate that I think they smashed it out of the park. Flesh and Blood is pretty much, it's so antithetical to that. Flesh and Blood releases everything in like 2 days in a weekend.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I've asked them a million times why they do it, and they say it's because of some like logistical issue. But slowly dripping it, allowing us to experience the cards one by one, and sort of each one that comes out expands our knowledge of the game and potential archetypes and deck builds, and it's a great experience. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this spoiler season for Rise of the Floodborn. One other thing that happened is apparently the restocks did hit. So maybe, I don't know if this was those October restocks. I'm assuming that's what it was, where they pushed up the restock date to October, and then it was like, did it happen? It like kind of didn't happen in October, but looks like it hit early November or very, very late October here. So that's good to see. I know SCG, posts on their website. Star City Games is a big online retailer, and yeah, for them to have stock is pretty significant. And also, Kawa, you and I were talking about this. I just want to bring this to the forefront. It does look like Star City Games has potentially made a deal with Ravensburg or Lorcana. I don't know if that's public info. I'm just going off of, they have a Lorcana 1K at the upcoming SCG Con Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. They're posting, it has a sort of a main banner on their website next to Magic and Flesh and Blood. And I just know how it worked with SCG and Flesh and Blood. I had a little bit of information on the back end where they were working directly together. And there is some sort of deal between those games. And yeah, we've seen SCG write content about Lorcana, so looks like they're invested sort of in the game. I will say that SCG is really interesting because I was recently at an SCG Con Dallas for the Flesh and Blood tournament, and they look like they're transitioning into a company that will host many games under their sort of flagship banner at these SCG Cons, because previously, like a few years ago, it was kind of only Magic, but even most recently, this past weekend in Dallas, it was Magic, Flesh and Blood, and My Hero Academia. So it looks like as we go to Pittsburgh, it's going to be like 4 games or something, I think. Yeah, it's Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Modern, Lorcana, and Flesh and Blood Battlehardened. So no My Hero Academia there, but still looks like you'll be able to walk up to an SCG Con and play like a slew of games as they, whether it's this year or in the next couple of years to come. Looks like that's what they're angling towards. Because SCG Con and SCG, Star City Games, and Channel Fireball are kind of the big 2 competitors there for tournament hosts and these like big conventions in the United States, at least. So it's interesting to see sort of how they're starting to differentiate and grow into this new market where there's a million TCGs coming out.
Definitely, yeah. Another 2 events I want to just touch on as we're talking about Star City Games. Obviously, recently we had the Miami Open run by PPG. I'm just looking on Twitter here, and they have announced 2 events for Rise of the Floodborn. So if any of you guys are interested in participating in some pretty big tournaments, I want to point them out right now. So we have on December 2nd to December 3rd, we have a Lorcana 2K taking place in Columbus. Is that Ohio, I want to say?
Yep, that is Ohio.
And it's going to be a Swiss Day 1 into a top cut. So that's a 2K. And then also on December 21st to 22nd, if you guys want to, get yourselves an early Christmas present and I guess win a Lorcana tournament, there's also another 2K taking place in Orlando, Florida as well. So I'm sure I'll get Brendan to put the links for those for that information down in the description below. But yeah, that's super exciting to see, right? I think PPG did a great job with the last Miami tournament, right? It was like the biggest Lorcana tournament we've ever seen. So if it's as big as that, I'm hoping it'll be bigger. It's gonna be great to see, and I'm really intrigued to see all the deck lists that are gonna come out of that once we really get our hands on Floodborn.
You know what I just noticed? We just talked about SCG expanding into Lorcana and hosting this upcoming tournament at SCG Con, which is a big deal. That's a big deal. It means that probably most of these SCG, maybe. I mean, I'm definitely assuming that these future SCG Cons will have Lorcana tournaments. But I also just remembered that last week we were just talking about TCG Players Invitational.
Yeah.
TCG Player is Channel Fireball. I forgot about that. I forgot TCG Player bought Channel Fireball. So it's going to be super interesting to see the 2 biggest tournament organizers, or to what I understand to be the 2 biggest tournament organizers for TCGs in the United States. Looks like they might be going head to head in terms of like Lorcana tournament hosting, which for us as the consumers, as the players, is the best thing possible. So wondering if we're going to see those at some of these Channel Fireball events. Does Channel Fireball even have opens anymore? It's interesting because Channel Fireball was hosting the Flesh and Blood events, but they lost the contract and SCG actually took it away. So, interesting. We have, I think that Lorcana organized play. We had these grassroots picking up with like PPG. I mean, PPG, and there's going to be other smaller tournament organizers get involved as well. I know Realm Games is looking, and Max is looking, and then there's the big boys like Channel Fireball and SCG. But also Q2 2024, we have Ravensburger committing to an official organized play program. I assume they're going to take a similar path that Flesh and Blood did. So Flesh and Blood just partnered with Channel Fireball initially, and now SCG, and SCG has, to what I understand, I'm not too versed on it, somewhat of a white label service to sort of, we will host your game, we will put your tournaments on, we will make the circuit happen kind of thing. So I would not be surprised to see them do a deal like that, which would be great. That would be like a very, very legitimate organized play program for us to deal with. The events would be super well run. The judging would be there. All the infrastructure you need. That's like best case scenario, to be honest. Way better than them trying to do it themselves, because that would be a lot of growing pains. So yeah, exciting. I think we're going to be spoiled in 2024 for Lorcana, to be honest. Lorcana is one of those games that the future kind of just gets brighter and brighter. I feel like with other games, you get the hype and then it kind of starts to peter off a bit. People get a little bit more cynical. The new game comes out, their attention diverts. But Lorcana's kind of done the opposite, where it's only gotten more exciting. The future's just gotten brighter. Surely there'll be an inflection point in the future where maybe the hype dies down. But it seems like in terms of news, we just get banger after banger after banger, and everything that we wanted with the game kind of comes to fruition.
It's happening. It's great.
Yeah. So I'm pretty excited, to be honest. I mean, looks like Lorcana's willing and ready to compete in that sort of big three. So, and I think that I think this game can do it from a fundamental standpoint, from the gameplay, etc. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a big TCG nerd, so it gets me super excited. Anyway, Kawa, you want to jump into this Rise of the Floodborn? You want to jump into these new spoilers?
Of course. Where are we starting, my friend? I
So
can't
I think
remember.
we're
Where did we
here-
finish last?
So we finished with Merlin, I believe, like Merlin the Crab. I think we're over on Lady Tremaine.
Yeah, I think we're about there.
Yeah, so we may go over one or two that we've already seen, but I don't think so. So let's start out with a Ruby card.
Yep.
We have Lady Tremaine, Overbearing Matriarch. She's a 2/2, cost 2, cannot be inked, Storyborn villain. Has ability that says, not for you. When you play this character, each opponent with more lore than you loses 1 lore, and it quests for 2. So this card is
Quest for
pretty
1,
interesting.
no?
Oh, yeah,
for
sorry, it
1.
does quest
Yeah.
for 1. It's so funny because I saw it quest for 1, and I just said 2 for no reason. Anyway, this card is interesting because it has a direct parallel to a card like Ursula, which doesn't have that conditional. But Ursula also draws off the 1 lore, but getting this effect for 2, is that super powerful? Because ultimately you're getting a somewhat underwhelming body, right? Like a 2/2, the quest for 1 is not super exciting, especially to be uninkable. What do you think about the ability? You think that's powerful enough?
I mean, I can compare it directly to a card like Aladdin, right? Aladdin is a free cost, is inkable, 2/2 that quests for 1, right? I'm pretty it does quest for 1. The difference with that card is obviously you play that card. You don't just play that card to be able to shift into the big Aladdin. That's obviously a nice upside to the card, but it's basically in my opinion, you're looking at this card as, okay, it's a Aladdin that you get out earlier because you played on 2 instead of 3. It's not inkable, but it accomplishes the same thing. Like, yes, like if you're already winning, you can play Aladdin, but usually I feel like, like I don't think you're ever going to have Lady Tremaine in your hand and be like, oh, this card is so dead because I'm ahead of lore and my opponent isn't. Maybe that's the situation, but overall it doesn't like blow me away. I think if I wanted to play this type of effect, I'd probably just play the smaller Aladdin just because it's inkable. That 1 extra cost more doesn't seem too bad to me, but like, I don't know, maybe it's okay, but from like initial impression, it doesn't seem great to me.
2 very restrictive things going on with this card. One is the ability. The ability is actually quite conditional. The opponent has to be on a higher lore than you. That's pretty significant, to be honest. Especially if you're playing. I mean, then it would really limit what kind of Ruby decks it could go into. Also, in uninkable, there's no way you're playing this card in control. It would be terrible. Control's uninkable slots are for the most premium cards in the game. So this would be more of an aggro where that ability is just irrelevant. And yeah, I don't know. Just as an uninkable, I see this card being, to be honest, mostly unplayable unless it's shifting into something that's absurdly broken.
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
All right, you want to read out the GOAT for us?
Yeah, we got Merlin the Goat. He is a 4-cost inkable, 4/3, Storyborn Mentor, sorcerer with an ability that reads, Here I come. When you play this character and when he leaves play, gain 1 lore. So, I mean, this card seems kind of interesting. The stat line, I'm not too impressed, right? I mean, for 4, you're only getting a 4/3, which can get smashed, which can get Rafiki'd, which can be dealt with pretty easily. But I mean, if you're ever playing some type of maybe aggro amethyst list, you're always getting 2 lore with this card, right? This is a 4 cost. You always get 2 lore with this. And then if it does stick, you possibly get even more lore for it. So I think you want to fit it into an aggro type of deck. But yeah, besides that, it seems like a fun card. I would definitely experiment with it for sure, because I think the idea of that you're always guaranteed 2 lore from this card is super interesting.
Yeah, it is. So this card definitely doesn't fit in control. I also think it doesn't fit into aggro.
Okay.
Where I think it fits in is the new archetype, which is this sort of bounce archetype
Sure.
in Amethyst.
You get more value out of it.
Obviously that deck doesn't exist yet, so it's pretty hard to sort of visualize what that deck list might look like. That being said, there's a few cards we've seen so far that have an effect somewhat like this, but those effects have been playable in other archetypes, like we saw with Mata Mim and the other cards. This card, I don't think so. I think if you're just playing this card as a 4 ink 4/3 that gets a lore when it dies and then quest for 1, it's super underwhelming. So I'd be very, very surprised if this is something that could make it into a deck list. Because like if you looked at, I mean, in control, right? Let's draw a direct comparison. In control, you would never play this over Pongo, right?
No,
like because if you need stats, right? If you need stats, you need 4. Because you're probably looking at this, you're like, oh, maybe you can place a control that deals with Cusco. Well, you know what else deals with Cusco? Gaston, and Gaston costs 2. So I'd rather trade my 2 costs for their 5 costs than my 4 costs for their 5 costs. So I think you need to be getting value out of this ability. This is one of the first cards we've seen that is under the umbrella of this bounce archetype that I actually think kind of only goes in that deck.
I actually, like, from the more I look at this card, I do think it's better than I've even, like, first looking at, mainly because it's a card that allows you to instantly get lore when you play it. There's not too many cards that can do that at the moment, right? We have...
there is a lot in Rise of the Floodborn.
I have the Fates, but that's what I'm saying, right? If there's a lot in Rise of the Floodborn, then maybe if there's a lot, then there's better options, sure. But it is interesting to note that is, you know, at the moment I look at this card and be like, oh, I definitely play this because... maybe I'm in that situation where I top deck a card and it's this and I win, right? It's such a rare situation, but it could happen. So for that instance, I think it's interesting. But yeah, I will definitely experiment with this card for sure.
Yeah. I do want to say for anybody listening to this that currently plays Lorcana, plays Constructed, Lorcana and the feel of Lorcana Constructed is going to drastically change in Set 2. Set 2 is not a adjacent set to Set 1 whatsoever. Set 1 has very, very, very few options to win the game outside of what is directly represented on board. And because of that, it's very much my turn, your turn. I can see if you're going to win. I can do things about it. Maybe I can make you lose a lore. And that's probably the extent of sort of my ability to interact with you. And then there, of course, is Eye of the Fates, which is outside of that parameter. But that's the only card. Outside of that, it's very much on board. As we progress these cards, you'll see the context of Lorcana and how decks will be able to gain lore, quest, win the game is going to change drastically because there will be ways to win the game outside of what's directly represented on board. So it's definitely going to change the tempo of the game quite a bit. All right. On to Prince Charming, Heir to the Throne. This is a Sapphire card. It's a 3/3, cost 4, can be inked, Dreamborn Hero Prince. It's a vanilla creature, so no text, and it quests for 3. I think this card is good.
Yep, I think it's good.
It's definitely in an archetype, but I'll tell you about the deck that beats on Ruby Amethyst the most, that beats on Control the most is, in my opinion, Emerald Sapphire. And this would be a direct slot in. So right now, the way the game currently works, at least against Control, one of the ways that these decks try to win usually is they'll quest up in the early game to get to like 15, and then pretty much everything they put on the board is a threat. It needs to be removed immediately, or it threatens to get to quest for the amount that is on the card. Because the way you deal with creatures in this game is generally they quest, you tap them, you kill them. And if you're playing Control, you should be ahead on board. So what you're faced with is every time they play a character, you need to have the Dragonfire, you need to have to be prepared. That being said, I think there will be more ways to interact with this. In the current state of the game, this card would be very good, in my opinion, something like an Emerald Sapphire, because dropping a 4-drop that threatens this much of your win condition is pretty good against something like Control. I'm going to tangent here, Kawa, because I'm super interested to see. I hear people have this discussion at my locals occasionally where they're like, oh, I wonder if they're going to add in priority and instance and all this other stuff. And I'll tell you that will never happen. But one thing that might happen is they might actually add in sideboarding. And I think that it would be a good addition to the game. So currently in game 2 or 3, you kind of just shuffle up the deck and go again.
Yeah.
But I would not be surprised to see that as a aspect of the game that's added later. Maybe it adds too much depth to the initial player, but I would argue that the beginning player is, they don't really care about sideboarding anyway. So,
do you know what's actually interesting about that is for the first like 2 to 3 weeks at just my locals, they did sideboarding. And I was like, it's not in the rules, not whatever. And like, no, I'm not the type of person I'm like, oh my God, it's against the rules, I'm not playing. Like, I'll still play, you know what I mean? Because like, it doesn't bother me that much. And some people said, oh, it's good. Some people said it's bad or whatever. But like, I've experienced what it's like to play against sideboard. And it, for the most part, it didn't seem too bad, right? It's like, because it benefits both. It benefits both players pretty much. Is like, I think when I was playing Control, I think at the time they were probably playing the mid-range deck, right? They took out some of their pieces that would deal with aggro a little bit more, and they want to put in more cards that could deal with control and help them win faster. So yeah, it's just funny you mentioned that because I've actually already experienced that.
Played with sideboard.
Yeah, and it's not bad, but again, like I'm of the opinion that if it comes to the game, I don't mind, but if it doesn't come to the game, I also don't mind too much. Right? I'm not of like, oh, I hate sideboarding or I love I'm kind of just like, if it happens, I'm okay with it. But you think it would be a benefit overall, yeah?
Oh yeah, I really like it. I think that it could change the dynamic of gameplay where you make less interesting and quote unquote, and doing my Dr. Evil quote fingers, relevant decisions in deck building, because you don't have to build your deck in a way that accounts for, everything that you would play. Because right now there's a lot of tension in deck building. Like you can put cards into your deck that will actively decrease your win rate against certain matchups and increase your win rate against others. So you're consistently making a meta call. Sideboarding doesn't get rid of that concept, but it definitely does mitigate it. So the argument against sideboarding is that it would add too much complexity to the game and it would get rid of that. But sideboarding adds so much more depth, and it makes the game feel a lot better, because when you do pair into your unfavorable matchup, like if you have a really, really good deck and you just have this one bad matchup, I mean, then you could be putting whatever the sideboard allocation is, whether it's 10 cards, 15 cards, you can be putting 15 cards that just are good against that matchup into your deck, and then you go to game 2 and you've got this whole new deck. So
yeah,
I like it. Is it correct for Lorcana? I don't know. I would say if you're listening to us, let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about that. But yeah, I think it's a possibility for the game for sure, and it could be cool. Anyway, Grand Duke.
Next card is Grand Duke, Amber card, 2-cost Inkable, 2/2. Storyborn ally with the ability, yes, your majesty, your prince, princess, king, and queen cards get +1 attack. So a very regal card. And I'm just going to be straight up. In my opinion, it's very hard to evaluate this card without really trying to like build a deck around it. Like I know there's a lot of prince cards, and there's a lot like there's a lot that you could do with this card. But the one thing I want to know is like, maybe this doesn't matter too much, because like, so rarities on cards, right? Obviously, we can see this as a rare card. Do you think, and I'm kind of assuming this, that obviously these rarities are put on certain cards because they are, quote unquote, like obviously like more powerful than other cards, right? Like it's not to say in set 1 we've seen some rare cards that are pretty much never used, right? So I'm thinking that the design team or whatever have kind of looked at this card and say, oh, well, there's actually some interesting things you can do. And I think that that rarity is on the card mainly because of possibly like how versatile this card is, right? You could probably make a lot of different decks that will benefit from Grand Duke's effect, but it's also not a crazy powerful effect, right? Like having +1 attack isn't crazy. However, in a possible resist meta, it might actually be pretty good. So yeah.
There's a few vectors in which you need to analyze this card on. First of all, there is somewhat of a Magic analog you can draw, which is Lords. So there are cards in Magic that will be typal based, and will say the rest of your cards that share this, that are merfolk or or goblins, they get +1/+1. And I think that card is called a Lord. This is not quite +1/+1, it's just +1 attack. That being said, evaluating this card, I do think you need to build a deck around it. But you also need to ask yourself, what is the floor? Because if the floor is you're playing a 2-cost Inkable 4/2 consistently, right? Something you're getting +1 to 2 other characters in like a super aggro deck, that could be good. That could be a reasonable floor. Because I think when you look at these kind of cards, a lot of people immediately go to Magical Christmas Land. They think about the ceiling, but it's important to think about the floor, because a 2-cost Inkable 2/2, at least in the current state of Lorcana, is pretty playable. Playable, whatever you want to interpret that as. Like you can play those cards in your deck totally. So if you're relatively consistently getting +1, +2 attack power out of this, that seems pretty decent to me. And I could see the rarity as a result. So I'm not crazy about this card. I don't think it's fantastic, but if you are able to, because I think before you would build a card around princes, because +1 attack is not enough of a payoff.
Yeah, sure.
For me to build, there can be other cards that help benefit princesses, and kings. We already have princesses as an archetype. But if you build an aggro deck first and it just happens to be able to slot in a bunch of princes, it's a pretty good 2-drop, and the 2-drop slot is pretty flexible. So I would say overall I think this is a good card, but it doesn't jump out to me as a great card.
For sure. Yep. All right, you want to take the next one?
All right. Yep, we got Arthur, Wizard's Apprentice. It is an Amethyst card, so 1/3, cost 3, cannot be inked. Dreamborn Hero Sorcerer. It says, student, when this character quests, you may return another chosen character of yours to your hand to gain 2 lore, and a quest for 1. So there you go. There's your Merlin payoff almost immediately. So you bounce Merlin back to your hand. You know how much lore that is, Kawa? That's 3 lore immediately. That's it's a big sink, right? You're sinking 7 ink into that play, but that's a lot. Gaining 2 lore. So I think, what's funny is this card jumps out to me as playable if it said 1 lore in the bounce archetype, right? We don't know the power level of that archetype quite yet, where the value should be exactly, but 2 lore seems like a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know
and it costs 3 as well. This card only costs 3. Like that's, It's
hard to evaluate that archetype, right? Because we don't know what the deck looks like. We have not played that deck against the current top rating decks in Lorcana. But bouncing back a character that gets a benefit from you bouncing it back and getting 2 lore seems pretty nice. Like even with cards that are not in Rise of the Floodborn, like bouncing back a Maleficent. And then playing it in a draw card, it's really, really bad tempo. Don't get me wrong; it's terrible tempo. But 2 lore is quite a bit. So this card looks pretty good. And this is again, in terms of rarity, this is quite a rare card. So this seems to be actually the signpost card for bounce so far. So this is kind of the signaling card. This is like one of the main cards that will help facilitate your engine.
Definitely. Yeah. Super interesting.
Freaking sweet.
Yeah,
I like the card.
Really nice.
Freaking sweet.
All right. Next card we have is Prince John within Emerald. He is a 3-cost uninkable 1/2 with ward, Brendan's favorite keyword. Ugh. And his ability is I sentence you. Whenever your opponent discards 1 or more cards, you may draw a card for each card discarded. The concept seems really interesting. It's like, imagine, let's say, actually, I'm going to do exactly what you said. I was about to start off with the ceiling. Let's start with the floor. I was going to say, let's do if you hit your bell, how crazy is this card, right? But you're playing a 3-cost uninkable 1/2. You better be taking making use of this card's ability, right?
Yeah.
If
it also
not,
quests
it's
for 2,
terrible.
right?
Yeah, it also quests for 2 for sure.
It quests for 2, but you will likely never tap this because this is like a static ability. This is effectively giving the ability of like an item, but it's more interactable. Kind of, but it also has ward. I don't know. This card is definitely hard to interact with. Don't get me wrong. Ravensburger has made an interesting choice with the amount of discard that is Emerald, because discard. So what's interesting is that discard and card draw accomplish similar things in a card game, but one feels like dog shit, and the other one is like, players can't really perceive how much advantage an opposing player is getting out of drawing additional cards, right? Because if you discard a card, it feels really bad. If your opponent draws a card, it doesn't have that like guttural feeling.
Sure.
So they've really gone heavy into the discard and Emerald. I don't know, to be honest. It's hard for me to say. I will say that if I don't know, it's kind of a useless statement, but if Emerald discard is the best deck in the game, that's going to be an interesting meta for sure. That would be wild. What are your thoughts on Prince John? Because you have immediately evaluated the stats. For me, I think this could be like a 1/1 even.
Sure.
And I guess, so the thing is like, cards like this, if we want to, I think that they're most susceptible to AoE removal, like Grab Your Swords, like Tinkerbell. I guess Tinkerbell's less relevant because they can't even hit it with the trigger, but like Grab Your Sword, so that it does get cleared by that.
It is only Grab Your Sword pretty much that I can think of, right? That actually really affects this card. Like, unless you're doing double Tink, or because Tink can hit stuff because it's AoE, but like nothing can ping this. So like, it is pretty much Grab Your Sword. If not, this card is actually sticking pretty well on board.
Yeah. We'll see if there's more tools to deal with cards with ward, because right now there's like absolutely freaking nothing other than AoE removal and
imagine sinking a Be Prepared into Prince John.
Yeah, that's like what you don't want to do as the control player 101, but it could be necessary. Yeah, we'll see. Prince John, very hard to evaluate. This is a context-based card, so hard to evaluate. On raw stats, it's pretty bad, but I mean, if you activate this once, you have a 3-drop that's drawing a card and making your opponent discard a card.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, that's like, you could just read this as draw 2 cards. You could read this as, opponent discards 2 cards. But yeah, 2-card differential is massive. So I think even activating this once, so you consider that to be the floor, this card is pretty good. Will it be good enough? I don't know. I don't know if you, in the current state of Lorcana, where you just walk up with a 60-card deck, if this card would be good enough against all different archetypes, because it's probably pretty good against control, but maybe not as good against like aggro. It could actually be totally useless for aggro.
So are we putting this within Emerald Steel and doing a whole new world? So you draw, what's this, 14 cards?
Yeah,
it's a possibility.
There's the combo.
Yeah,
there's the combo.
Possibility.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, by the way, because that is exactly what you're going to do. I remember seeing the spoiler a couple weeks or like a week ago and thinking about that, and I actually forgot about it as we evaluated this card. Yeah, this card is ridiculous with the whole new world.
Yeah, it's so good.
I don't know how those triggers, I'm assuming the triggers work the way we expect them to, where you actually do draw the cards that your opponent discards. Yeah, that's obnoxious. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like, I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but like maybe Mill will become somewhat of an archetype. Like if you can fit Prince John into the Lady Tremaine, you
wouldn't want to play to Mill because you would draw more cards than your opponent.
Well, if you have a really big deck, then I mean, then it's less.
Oh yeah, I forgot this game has infinite deck size.
I guess it does. It's still not great, right? Because yes, you are drawing more cards than your opponent, but then the beauty of Prince John is like maybe you can just kill it off, and then it doesn't matter. I don't know. It'd be interesting to explore for sure.
I think you just play this in like basically a whole new world, but you have Emerald as part of the deck, because currently a whole new world decks or Will Steel runs Amber, and I think that you could replace Amber out of that color combination potentially if something like this was powerful enough.
Yeah, I'll have to share an Emerald Steel deck that I faced last weekend when I was at locals, and I just about beat it, but man, it took me for a ride. I think it's a really, really good color combination.
Interesting. Mata Mim.
Mm-hmm.
Is this me?
Yeah, this is you.
Mata Mim, Purple Dragon. This card is exciting. It's a 5/7. Cost 7, can be inked. Storyborn villain, Sorcerer Dragon. It has evasive. Oh, it just gets me excited. I love waking up to the smell of evasive in the morning. It says, I win, I win. When you play this character, banish her or return another 2 chosen characters to your hand in a quest for 4.
Yeah. So one less ink than Brave Little Tailor Mickey. You're getting not much better stats, right? Plus 2 health, which is definitely relevant. Because this can't be hit by oh, never mind, it's evasive. What am I saying? Doesn't even matter. But yeah, the condition is you have to have 2 other cards down. But if you have 2 other cards down, if you're playing, if this bounce archetype deck kind of has some cheap things that you're bouncing back constantly, which might be the case, right? If you're just playing like 1 or 2 costs that you're constantly bouncing back, say with Arthur, say with all the Merlin cards that we saw, the Madam Mims, then if you just have those cards on board, you play Madam Mim on turn 7, suddenly your opponent has to answer that, right?
So I think in a bounce archetype, you want your engine to be more like the 3-cost Arthur rather than the 7-cost Mata Mim. I would say that I definitely err on the side of very. I'm a Brave Little Tailor hater already, because I think Brave Little Tailor, it's exciting, it quests for a lot. It's his big body, but it doesn't really accomplish a lot more than 4-cost Pongo or 5-cost Goofy. And all it does, really, in my opinion, is it gives your opponent the ability to trade up on their removal. So it trades up on every piece of removal. Be Prepared trades up, Dragonfire trades up, etc. And I just think that card, the juice, is not worth the squeeze. It's actually pretty bad. I think it's super, super overrated. Can you land a Brave Little Tailor against a non-control deck or a non-mirror deck or an aggro deck, and it quests for a lot in the game? Yes, but I don't think the Brave Little Tailor was key to you winning that game in the first place anyway. I think it's good versus mid-range, if it could be good versus anything. I think Mata Mim is actually more unplayable than Brave Little Tailor. That clause where you have to put 2 characters back, that's a lot.
Sure.
You already have to have quite a few things on board. So I don't think that it fits in anything outside the bounce archetype. And in the bounce archetype, I would see this as being underwhelming, but I could be wrong. That deck list, I just have no idea what it looks like. So yeah, Bottom Mim, really cool. Very exciting card, like this big, like Shivan Dragon-esque kind of card, like this big, I don't know, this big Timmy card almost. So I just don't think it's very good, to be honest.
Sure. Okay, next card we have is a Legendary Scar, 7 cost, uninkable, 6/5 with Rush, with an ability, Daddy isn't here to save you. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may ready this character. He can't quest for the rest of this turn. So this card is basically, okay, let's say an ideal world is you want to play Scar when your opponent is playing, I don't know, let's just say Amber Sapphire, and they have a Hades on board and they have a 5-cost Maleficent. You just trade into both of those.
It's like Maui, right?
It's exactly like Maui. It's exactly like Maui, except it can actually quest for 2, which I don't think that ever really matters. Like, if you're actually playing this card, you don't really care about how much this card can quest for. But it is a difference to Maui. And obviously, it costs 2 more and it's not inkable. Looking at this straight away, I think it's quite underwhelming. I don't think it's
bad.
That good. Yeah,
I think it's bad. The cost to play for an uninkable card is really significant. And Maui doesn't quest. So there's a lot of cards in Lorcana like this where they aren't the best at doing one thing, but as a way to compensate for that, they also do another thing that is just polar opposite to their original role. So if you look at this card as the role of like, let's clear things off the board, with Rush, which is a very significant ability. But now you add these other restrictions onto it. So you add the restriction of making it cost 2 more, you make it uninkable, but you're like, but it also quests for 2. You're like, well, the reason this card was in my deck was actually just to kill shit on the board. Are you going to encounter situations where you end up questing with this card? Yes, that would happen. Like, you would probably use both abilities, but in a game like Lorcana, where your deck list is tight, you're probably just going to play the best role players of that role, right? So I can't imagine this being better than Maui. And is this good as just like a curve out to turn 7? Like, is this good enough as a turn 7 play? I don't think so as an uninkable. Uninkable is a massive cost to pay in this game. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Scar.
If this was 6 cost uninkable and it didn't quest for anything, would you consider it? I think it would be obviously better in my opinion.
Definitely better. I don't know. Uninkable is a big cost. Maybe. It'd be funny if this card ended up being super playable, and then we're sitting here debating. It's like, if it costs 1 less, would we play it? I don't know, to be honest. I can already see it's worth like $70 or whatever. I don't know how relevant that is on Lorcania, but I don't think that this card fits into any decks that I'm currently playing. It could fit into like a mid-range deck, but I don't know. I think you got to be really selective with your uninkable cards. And this is a card that looks to me like a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, for sure.
All right,
go ahead.
Li Shang, Archery Instructor, 3/6 steel card, 5 costs, can be inked. Storyborn Hero says Archery lesson. Whenever this character quests, your characters gain evasive this turn, and it quests for 2. Okay, that's relevant. So this is a 3/6, and it gets all of your other characters evasive. That's pretty funny. With Ruby Amethyst evasive. It makes so your opponent doesn't have... Wow.
Oh, Brenda's scared now.
Yeah, so this card single-handedly destroyed my archetype. Great. Wow, this is such a funny card, because what you have to ask yourself is, can you play a 5-cost 3/6 in your deck that quests for 2? Because that's kind of underwhelming, but the ability,
yeah, I think the ability is kind of worth,
maybe, right? It's worth depending on the meta. In the current meta, this ability is pretty freaking worth if you expect a lot of Ruby Amethyst to show up, because this absolutely shits Ruby Amethyst. I mean, this is a really good card. I would have preferred, if I really wanted this effect, I would prefer this effect at a cheaper cost, because 5 is relatively expensive. Means they can trade even with Dragonfire. They're pretty close to be prepared when you have this card on board. But that being said, right now, there's not a lot you can do about evasives other than have evasives or have spot removal. So they are very powerful in Chapter 1. Li Shang definitely significantly mitigates that. I think this card is really good, but I'm also biased because the deck that I play the most, the deck that I enjoy playing the most,
it's really good against
gets destroyed by this card.
At first, when I read this, I thought this said when you play this character. I'm like, oh my god, that's kind of because if this was on play, then basically, like you said, like you couldn't actually remove it because it's on quest. You could, if you have the Dragonfire, you can get rid of it, and then your evasives are kind of safe, right? But if this was on play, I think it would be really good, like super, super good.
Yeah, I still think it's super powerful because if you think about evasives from a fundamental perspective, evasives are understated characters. Like you're playing bad characters in order to get the evasive ability. This comes down to 5, allows your opponent to trade favorably into all your evasives. They trade their 2 drops, their 3 drops for your 4 drops that are 2 3s. And Li Shang, I think it's a good card. I would definitely have my eye out on this card if I was playing Steel. And I don't know, this is one of those cards where it really makes me super interested for Rise of the Floodborn because we're so used to Ruby Amethyst being the control color combination at this point, and I think by no means is that guaranteed to be the case in Rise of the Floodborn.
All right, next card we have here is Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. It's a Emerald action and song. It is a 3-cost uninkable. It reads, a character with cost 3 or more can exert this to sing this song for free. Return chosen character of yours to your hand to play another character with the same cost or less for free. What do you think, Brennan?
Wow. That's interesting. I mean, so if you're looking at this card, like I get to remove damage counters off of one of my cards because I get to save one of my cards, bounce something back, get the damage counters off, play it later, play something for free. I think that would be a pretty underwhelming use case.
Is it good with like shift? Like if you want to shift something for a little bit cheaper and then you can get something even bigger out faster. That is one thing that comes to mind that could possibly be interesting, but I don't think it's insane. I'm just trying to think of like, okay, what's the kind of value situation where you play a card for less, but then you kind of replace it for something even bigger, right? That's the kind of shift mentality I have.
Yeah,
this card.
I think you just got to think about this card is it's a lot of card disadvantage, right? Like no matter which way you kind of cut it and you look at the situation, you are effectively discarding this card for that effect. So
it's like it's kind of like just in time in a way. If not actually just in time it does a different thing, but in terms of like you're replacing a card in your hand to bring something else out, sure.
Yeah, just in time is consistently cheating resources, where this is not doing that. This is not cheating any resources. Yeah. So cheating resources is powerful. Playing 5 drops on turn 3 against control is really powerful. This just doesn't do that whatsoever. I would say evaluating this card in a vacuum where we are right now, it looks pretty bad to me. That being said, this is like one of those cards where there could just be one interaction that doesn't come to mind immediately. We're like, okay, this card has a use case. But from a fundamental perspective, I think this card is pretty bad.
Sure.
All right, on to Tigger, one of a kind, 3/3, Ruby, cost 3, can be inked, Dreamboard Tiger. Says energetic. When you play an action, this character gets +2 this turn, and it quests for 1. It's interesting. I mean, a 3-mana 3/3 is like a fine body, right? But if you 3 mana 3/3, is that enough? Where it's getting the +2 attack. So when you play an action, you get +2. I think that's pretty conditional. I wouldn't really evaluate this card based off that consistently. But if this is a 3-cost 3/3 that can kind of consistently trade up, I guess it's fine. But yeah, I think this card is just super average. I don't think the ability is insanely powerful. I think it's very, very conditional. But the stats are fine in a very small. Yeah, in the very small card pool that is Lorcana right now, it could be playable if you need a 3-drop. But other than that, I think it's just fine.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. All right, so the next card we have is Donald Duck in Steel Deep Sea Diver, 5-cost inkable, 6/5 Dreamborn hero. This is a vanilla character, and it just quests for 1. So this is basically Cerberus but reversed, right?
With flipped. Which one do you think is better? Which do you think it's better to have a 6 attack, 5 defense, or 5 attack, 6 defense?
It's interesting because like there are certain cards that I can think of that have 6 health that like it's really good to hit into them. But then if that's the case, I just play Maui. I don't think I'd ever play this card, right? Like I'd play a 5/6 because I feel like that health for 5 is worth so much more than if this is flipped. And if I want to actually be aggressive to try trade into things like I mentioned, the 5-cost Maleficent, Hades, whatever, I just wouldn't play Donald Luck. I'll just play Maui. So.
Yeah, I think that Lorcana is a game of big butts. Like the butt is way stronger than the attack. So I think this is a derivative of Cerberus. It's just flipped stats, and I think the Cerberus in most scenarios, at least in the current state of constructed, is better. So it's an option if you need it, but I think it's overall not a great card. It's just vanilla card anyway, so it's hard to call it bad. Next one is Minnie Mouse Zipping Around. This is a Ruby card. It's a 3/2, cost 2, can be inked. It's a Storyborn hero. It's a vanilla creature, so no text, and a quest for 1. So 2 cost 3/2. This is maybe a card that you could. I don't know if Minnie Mouse has like a shift. I think it does.
She does. It was the evasive one, wasn't it?
Yeah, the evasive one.
The diver has shift 2, which is basically Pongo, but it's whenever you play a second action in a turn, this character gets +2 lore this turn. So,
yeah, and that card is interesting. So I think it's important for us to evaluate these cards mostly by themselves. We'll probably do a constructed review on the last week. Yep. By the way, and then we'll try to bring it all together, evaluate the cards in the context of other cards, and maybe look at deck list, like a balanced deck list, and be like, is this actually powerful? But this by itself, 2 cost 3/2, it's fine. It's fine. It's playable, but as more cards enter the game, I think there's less of a likelihood that you're playing just straight up vanilla creatures in your deck.
Yeah, can't say much more about it. I think it might be useful for shift, but yeah, by itself, it seems fine. I mean, if there's a lot of 3-cost 3/3 cards within the meta, it can trade up, but then it can also be probably removed pretty easy as well. But again, all depends on what type of meta we're in. All right, next card we have is Daisy Duck Secret Agent. This is an Emerald card. She's a 4-cost inkable 2/3 that quests for 2 Dreamborn ally with an ability called Thwart. Whenever this character quests, each opponent chooses and discards a card. Yeah, this
quest for 2.
Yeah, quest for 2. This discard.
That is Emerald in the set.
Yeah,
I remember I think all three of us were talking. You, me, you, and Moyen. And Moyen was like, "How do you not play Emerald in the next set? It just looks insane. I don't know. Like you're getting this effect on turn 5. It feels like any sort of control deck or any sort of deck that's trying to go late will just get absolutely wrecked by Emerald. I don't know. It's a powerful effect. I mean, a 4-cost 2/3. So you're basically gonna ideally you're gonna get your opponents to discard one card.
Yeah,
I think like the regular like the floor or the average of this thing is your opponent discard one card. It's a very understated character, has the same stats as Pongo, and then it gets cleared. But I don't know. This seems pretty good. Emerald in their discard just seems actually kind of nuts. So I don't know. If you turn 3, you drop that what's his name, Prince John.
Yeah,
and then you play this. Like, I mean, it's such a disgusting curve out. Like your opponent is just going to be immediately top decking. I'm super interested to see how this plays out because this is one of those things where, from a game design standpoint, I don't understand how the play pattern is not absolutely miserable for the opponent. But Ravensburger made a conscious decision to build Emerald around this. So they've obviously play tested it. I think they did a really good job balancing set 1. So I'm cautious, optimistic but cautious because it looks terrible to play against, bro. It looks so bad. But yeah, I mean, it looks like getting back to the evaluation, looks like a good card. Daisy Duck.
I agree. Yeah. This next one though.
Yeah, we'll hit a few more before we close out for the episode. We'll try to hit some of these non-vanilla characters. All right, we got the ultimate Timmy card. We have Goofy, Knight for a Day. It's a 10/10 in steel, cost 9, can be inked, Dreamborn hero Knight, and it quests for 4. So a 10/10 that quests for 4 that costs 9. I mean, I think that.
Yeah, you don't play Maui, so you don't play this card. You don't play the big Maui, so you don't play this big card, in my opinion.
Yeah, these cards are just not good in Lorcana. They just give your opponent like infinite agency against you. By the time you get to turn 9, a card like this is not as threatening as it looks because you're not really going to be doing combat with this card. Like if you're dropping this card on turn 9 and doing combat with it by turn 10, your opponent is probably already in a losing situation where they don't immediately remove a card like this or aren't just like winning the game on turn 9 anyway. So yeah, it looks pretty bad for me, but it's I'm sure some people will enjoy playing with this card. This is one of those cards where it's like there's these different. There's an idea. There's these different psychographics in card games. There's the Spike, which is the ultra competitive player.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Timmy, which plays cards like this, likes to play like the fun cards, the big cards.
Yeah.
There's the Johnny, who likes to play the ultra synergistic kind of like usually bad deck. So in set one, it would be Mill. I can't remember if there's a fourth one. But yeah, those are like the psychographics. And in the psychographics, this would be a Timmy card. This is this card is pretty bad. All right.
Next card we have is Rapunzel within Amber. This is a 5-cost inkable gifted artist, 0/6 with shift 3. The card can quest for 2, and its ability reads, let your power shine. Whenever you remove 1 or more damage from one of your characters, you may draw a card. Seems pretty interesting. All I'll say is I don't want to kind of get into too many crazy spoilers, but I think there's an upcoming card. We might get to it next week. That combos pretty well with this card, but
are these spoilers that you've seen before everybody else?
Of course, yeah. I've seen all of these.
You've seen all of them?
Yeah, I'm actively looking at all of these.
Oh, I thought you were talking about spoilers about unspoiled.
Oh no. The other card has been spoiled already. I think it's in I want to say it's in Sapphire. But what I want to note about this card that's interesting is it does have shift 3, so I'm expecting a cheaper Rapunzel to get printed, because at the moment there's it's pretty much the 4 cost and the 6 cost.
Yeah, the 1/5. I think this card is gonna be pretty bad competitively. The only reason I say so is like Rapunzel's already a card that your opponents will likely play around. Like Rapunzel is one of those cards that was the most broken card in the game, and then it became like a little bit less good. Still very good card, but just became less good as people became aware that you can try to play around it. Obviously, there's an opportunity cost to playing around it. So it's non-zero, it's significant. That being said, I'm not a fan of 0 attack characters because they can be traded for free. They just represent a way for your opponent to lose tempo. And it just seems a bit win more because you also have to be removing these counters. So I think it's more of like a kind of like a synergistic fun deck than a competitive deck.
Sure. Even if you think there's good AoE heals in your deck.
Yeah, even then it's just kind of slow and clunky. Because if you're shifting it, you're 2-4ing yourself and then you're getting this ability. It could end up being powerful in like an ultra synergistic deck, but outside of that, not so much.
So the next card we have here is Pinocchio, Talkative Puppet. This is an Amethyst card. 2-cost uninkable 1/1 Storyborn hero with an effect called Telling Lies. When you play this character, you may exert chosen opposing character, and this card quests for 1. So this is essentially freeze, but attached to a body, correct? I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's uninkable. I think freeze is inkable.
Yeah, I'm going to double check that for you now.
Yeah, this card is so bad. What the? This card is terrible. Interesting.
Freeze is uninkable as well.
Okay, so freeze is also unplayable. Yeah, I mean, I could be missing something. Obviously, freeze on a body is better than just freeze most of the time. That's just sort of how spells and bodies work. So enter the battlefield effects are very powerful. Yeah, I don't know. This card seems super, super bad to me. I would be very surprised to see it in any deck list. But yeah, what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's great, honestly. I think maybe there's a situation where you want to use it to be like, trading into your opponent's things, or I mean that's pretty much it, right? Because all it's used for is that once you exert it, it doesn't like stay exerted. It's not like Elsa. It doesn't actually freeze the character until the start of their next turn, or whatever Elsa's ability is. So yeah, very underwhelming card in my opinion.
All right, next up is 4 Dozen Eggs. This is a Sapphire action song. Cost 4, can be inked. And it says, your characters gain resist +2 until the start of your next turn, which means damage dealt to them is reduced by 2. Oh, that's an interesting one. So resist 2 is a lot. It's a lot. But there's a lot of things that need to be going the right way. I mean, if you're the aggressor, if you're the aggro deck, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to clear your stuff.
Sure.
So like an opposing control player might be looking to play Maui on turn 5, and maybe their Maui doesn't clear everything you have on the board. Outside of that, worst case scenario is you play something like this, it gets Be Prepared. And the mid-range mirror is probably decent, but is it good enough for an entire card to justify an entire card? I think the best case of this is your opponent has tapped out. You can play this card. Now you don't have to trade. You just value trade everything on board, but I think that's a bit of a magical Christmas land.
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan to be honest. I would rather have the item that gives resist, to be honest. But
Sure.
yeah.
That's
where I'm at.
It's the same for me. I think if you're playing some type of aggro deck that this card comes down at the perfect time to protect all of your cards and then you win after it, it could be good. But I think people will mess around with it and it might be pretty good. I mean, we know that resist is a very powerful keyword, right? So we could be saying, oh, this isn't great, but then it could turn out, this card could turn out to be pretty good, right? I think it's one of those cards where it could actually be decent, but
I'd be surprised if it became pretty good. Could it be playable? Maybe. I think this card, it's a lot for the cost of an entire card. It needs like some things to sort of line up. So I'm not a huge fan of it. But I think that I've been sleeping on the resist. I don't know. I feel like I don't sleep on resist. I definitely sleep on cards that are kind of one cards like virtually do nothing, which is kind of what this is. Doesn't really impact the board like immediately. It's not a body. But yeah, I did kind of, and I am kind of sleeping on the resist steel item because it's uninkable. But I don't know, it's just hard to tell at this point. Anyway, the next one, I'll let you close this out with the last one here.
So we have Queen of Hearts, Quick Tempered with an Emerald. It's a 2-cost uninkable card, 1/2 Dreamborn Villain Queen with an ability Royal Rage. When you play this character, deal 1 damage to chosen damaged opposing character. And this can quest for 2, so it's it's the same amount of lore that I can quest and same stats as Flynn Rider, which is known to be a very good card. I do think that Flynn Rider is a much better card because it's
infinitely better. Yeah, right?
It's like inkable. Its ability is better. I mean, this is just a body with Stampede attached to it, and Stampede is already a terrible card, in my opinion. But I can see why this card is kind of printed in terms of, I mean, we saw, I think it was the legendary Beast that if you, I can't remember what the card does, but it has some synergy by basically like dealing a lot of damage to your opponent's cards. But the problem with this is, I mean, the cards already have to be damaged. So that's why I hate Stampede as a card. I remember when I was first playing the starter decks, I was like, this card is so bad. Why is it in my hand? Get it out now. But yeah, I do think that the being able to quest for 2 is good, but I just don't think you're slotting this card into any deck over Flynn Rider, in my opinion.
Yeah, so Beast is the 6-cost Emerald card, 4/5 that says whenever an opposing character is damaged, you may ready this character so you can quest with it.
Yeah, sure.
Will that deck be a thing? This card I think only goes in that deck.
Yeah.
Or has to be in a deck supported by Beast because this card is so bad by itself. Yeah, which makes sense why it's uninkable because the Beast's effect is very powerful. So. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, we'll evaluate all the cards in context of each other at the end and do an entire set review. But evaluating this card by itself, it is absolutely garbage. It's terrible.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, that concludes spoilers for this week. Let us know what you think. If you agree, if you disagree, let us know what we got wrong. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. If you enjoy this podcast, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps so much more than you can imagine. It's the number one thing you do to support us. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Brendan APG. Kawa's at Kawatech_CG. Yeah, until next time, see you all next week.